I have decided to make the Smart Doll trench coat. I've cut the pieces out and I've sort of organized them so they make a little bit of sense to me because there's a lot of pieces. So we have the belt, that's pretty easy, and I organized them according to what kind of fabric I'm going to use. So there's going to be the belt of the main fabric, the back yoke, the back side, the back center, and these are two pieces, one piece, and then for the front, we have the front flap. That's going to be for the zipper, and the front facing, which has to be the same color as the fabric, so that's why I included it here. And then I also have to cut two of interlining, and the front piece, two pieces, and the front yoke, and then the pocket, the flaps, that's four. We have the top collar and the under collar, one of each, and this will be the belt loops, and of course the sleeve, two, and the sleeve cuff. Of the lining fabric, we're gonna cut the pocket bag, the front lining, I'll figure it out when I sew it, and the front side lining. The first thing I did was find my back yoke, my back, and the sides, because I'm going to work on put everything to the side, and I'm going to work on the back first. And the first thing I do is make a little snip on each line. These little lines are the equivalent to notches on a regular pattern. Sew along the back, leave the splits open, and then attach your sides to the back. The yoke is attached, and I top stitched it along the above the seam, right on the yoke. And before I put my pattern pieces away, I'm going to mark where my belt loops are, just to have it ready. I'm not going to attach them yet, but this is how I mark them. I'll put a pin where it should go. and it should go right here, so I'm just gonna mark it for now. I've got all my pieces together for the front, but the first thing I'm starting with is to sew the little flaps, to make the little flaps. And for this, I'll just mark them, sew along, leaving this edge open so you can flip it around. I'm getting ready to attach the front pieces together, and for this I assembled what I needed. I'm cutting the notches to match my seams, and I have my flaps already and my pocket linings. I'm also marking where the zipper fold is gonna be, so I went ahead and did that. And I'm going to mark where the belt loops are just by folding this and making a little mark, and that's on the front side of the fabric. And I'll do this on both sides. The loop is going to be right on the seam, so when you mark it, make sure you mark it away from the seam so that you can see your marks later. And I'm also marking, this has to match these two lines, so I'll mark that on the pattern on the outside just so it's a little bit easier. For the lining, I just made little notches. There's many ways of marking things. This is just the way the method I use. So we're ready to start assembling. You can start with the pockets. So for the pockets, the flap is going to go here on the right side of the fabric. So I made the two little notches. Pin that. we're still working on the right side of the fabric. I'm just going to flip it over and pin the other piece. So the lining goes on top of the flap, matching your notches. Same way on the other side. And I had made the little notches anyway, so I know that's exactly where it is. Just temporarily pin that. Okay, and we're just gonna do a little basting stitch right along the seam line, or actually a seam right along the seam line. So let's go ahead and do that, and then I'll come back and we'll attach the sides. Okay, so this is what it should look like once the facing is attached. And that's going to go towards the front. I also went ahead and pressed the seam that's going to go over the, where I'm going to top stitch over the zipper, just so I can have it ready. I did the same thing for the yoke. So next is going to be attaching the sides to the front, and we're going to do that by folding the zipper lining out, and then using my notches, I'll pin the sides to the front. I did my side seams. So I sewed up to the flap on both sides, and then along the pocket flap. And then your pocket flap is going to be facing the front as well as your pockets. So go ahead and press that. I'm not gonna press it. I'm gonna press it just up to here because I don't want to erase my my belt loop marks. So do the same thing on the other side. I'm just pinning it so I remember that I'm doing it that I'm facing it that way, because you want your pockets facing towards the front and your flap facing towards the front, so your little doll can put her hands in the pocket. Okay, next, and this I just ironed it. We're not going to do any top stitching. We're not going to do any serging yet. The next step is to match your notches on your yoke and sew the yoke on each side. I switched up the fabric that I'm using for the lining because the other fabric was too thin, and also as soon as I pressed it, it burned. So now the next step is to make the hem on these two pieces, on the lining pieces. My seams are finished. on the lining, and now I'm going to attach the facing to the lining, this side and this side. The lining should match up to this line, so I'm going to go ahead and mark that. So this is what you should have as far as the lining. We're going to go ahead and put that to the side for now, and we're going to make our belt loops. For the belt loops, just serge one end, and then we're going to fold the unserged end under the serged end, and then we're going to top stitch on each side. There's 3 belt loops here. After we do the stitching, we're going to cut them. This is what the belt loop should look like. Serge one end, fold the other end in, and then the top, and press it. And now I'm going to top stitch on each side. And then I will fold on each end of the loop. And what I usually do is I glue them down just so that it'll be easier for me when I'm attaching them. Or you can press them. This fabric's not too thick, so I think it'll work without even using fabric glue. I just use a very small dot and hold them together. I do the first one and then do the others the same exact way. If you don't have clips, you can use you can just put something heavy on top of it until it glues. Well, the loops are drying. I'm going to start working on the front again, and I'll do the top stitching along the yoke. And still working on the front, I'm going to serge this seam here, just the bottom seam. The top is going to be covered by the lining, so there's no need to serge all the way to the top. And then after I do that, serge this seam and this seam right here, I'll attach the back to the front at the shoulders. So now our belt loops are ready to be put on, and you don't even have to pin them because you already marked them. And at the machine, I'll just sew on the top, align the stitching, and align the stitching on the bottom. And it goes right on the seam there, and then the other ones go on the seam over here, like right in the middle of the seam. And the same for the other side. I attach my belt loops on the front and the back. Now we're going to work on the collar. So you want to take the under collar, is the one that's going to be attached to the main fabric. So mark your notches notch at the neck points and in the center, and start pinning around on this line. Start pinning it to the collar, starting at the center, then the shoulders, and then towards the front, all the way to the front. I've attached the collar, the under collar, and if you're satisfied with the way it came out, you can go ahead and trim it, and I will trim it, or you can clip it if you feel more comfortable trimming it. If you trim it, it'll lay nice and flat on the curve. Now we're going to attach the collar to the facing sides. I'm getting ready to attach the collar to the facings. I marked where the seam should be because that's what's going to be attached to the NP right here, the neck point. And I finished the shoulder with a serge seam. So we're gonna mark our piece. Make sure to adjust the seam. This is a smaller seam than the neck was, than the under collar. And we will attach starting at the corner. Right sides facing each other. And then your little notch is going to coincide with the seam line. And then sew your seam right across from here to here, and do the same for the other side. If you do it this way, it'll be easier to find which way to start. So from the end to where the shoulder seam should be, and it should look like this. So I'm going to go ahead and make my seam all the way across. That way I'll have the fold line. That'll be my guide, the seam here for the fold line. So I measure my zipper ending at that line right there, and this zipper has the plastic here, so, and it's a separating zipper, and it has a little line over here. That's where I'm going to stitch the zipper to. And over here on the top, I'll just fold it to where I marked where the zipper should end. So I marked it on that side. I'm going to measure it so that it's the same on the other side. Mark it. And then at the top, it's going to be folded like so. And it's just so that it doesn't catch this part. If it's too bulky, I might just cut it, but for now, I just want to leave it like that. So do the same thing on the other side. I've decided to pin the zipper first along the sewing line because I don't want to sew over the part that opens and closes the zipper. And this zipper has a line that goes from there all the way to the top, and that's where I want to catch it. Everybody's zipper will be different, so the important thing is that you want to make sure that your seams match at the top and at the neck and at the bottom. I'm going to sew along the fold line there. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Now we're going to go ahead and attach the lining. So you're going to open your piece up like that. And match your collar to the under collar. And start pinning. Do the same thing for the other side. And then basically we're going to sew all the way from the bottom up to the top of the zipper, across, and back down to the other side. So let's go ahead and do that. And remember to adjust your seam lines. Here on top of the top part of the zipper, the seam line is smaller. And the seam line in front is a little bit bigger. We're gonna follow the same seam where you attached your zipper. So to attach the lining to the side here, I still used a zipper foot and I followed the same stitch that I used to attach the zipper. And then when I get to this part, I'm gonna skip it and then do this part again using the zipper foot. This was a little bit harder because you have to remember that you have the zipper pull on this side, and while you're sewing it, you have to make sure you pull your zipper down and you don't go over your zipper pull. So I'm gonna sew the other side now, and then I'll switch to the regular foot and sew the seam at the top across. Okay, so all done with the stitching along the sides and the neck, and I am going to go ahead and start cutting my seams. Clip your corners and clip where there's a lot of bulk but not your zipper. Just clip your fabric. You can clip that little part of the zipper. Clip on the corner there. So far so good. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish turning it completely and see how that folds there. That's gonna cover the seam. And this, I'm gonna trim this seam a little bit, and then the facing is gonna cover that seam. So let me just put that to the side. After I press it, and we're gonna work on our sleeves. So mark your clips on your sleeves, because it does have a front and a back. The back side is going to be the one with the 2 notches. And notice that the seams are also different. The seam for the sleeve is a lot smaller than the seams for the side. So I prepared the belt, the cuff belt, and in the same way as the belt loops, except that you fold this edge first and then fold the other 2 in. Okay, back with the bodice. I pressed it again, all the layers, and I did some little finishing touches, like I tacked this, the pocket flap, I tacked it right here with a little stitch, just catching the underside of the flap and making sure I didn't catch the the top so you can't see the stitch. Same thing on the other side. I also basted the collar down before in preparation for the top stitching. So let's start that again. Pin it all the way around. And the seam is a tiny seam. Just make sure you use that size seam when you're attaching it. After attaching it, then you're going to serge around. Here are the sleeves attached. They were not easy. So instead of serging to finish my seam, I just did a little zigzag stitch. Because I didn't want to risk cutting part of it off or messing it up somehow. I'm going to start working on the seam. So we're gonna flip this seam over like so, and gonna sew. Okay, before I do that, I'm gonna make a serge right here because that's gonna show. No, I take that back. So we're gonna fold that seam back like this, and then make a seam line from the end of this to here, according to this seam here. So we're gonna sew from here to the end of that facing, and make sure you fold your seam back like that, so that when you flip it over, you're not seeing the seam. So that's about an eighth of an inch. I don't know, I'm not good with measuring, so with reading my measurements, so I'm going to just mark it down using my little guide ruler. So I'm going to do that on both sides. Flip it over at the zipper. Flip your seam back. Mark your seam. Okay, so this is what we're going to sew. Now that I'm done with that, and this is going to be flipped like this, and that's how it's going to look, but we're leaving it unflipped until we cut the seams a little bit. But before we do the final hem on the bottom, we're gonna attach the sides. So you had your little flap already there. I'm gonna pin it on the outside. And start pinning your sides and seam along each side. Close the side, in other words. And when you close your sides, you're going to catch your facing together with the side. So basically, this is the seam that you're gonna make. And then also, while I was thinking about the cuffs here, I'm just gonna attach it right up to the seam, because now that I think about it, I think what this line indicates is where you tack it down. Because the way I pinned it before, I had some left over on that side. So I'm gonna pin it that way. And I'm gonna do the same with the other side. I'm done sewing the side seams, and before I go ahead and serge the whole thing, I want to make sure I didn't catch my cuffs. Okay, and I'm going to make sure that my seams match at the underarm. And now I'm going to go ahead and serge right along each side. I've serged my sides, and now I'm going to mark my hem before I serge the bottom, because when you serge them, you cut some of this part off and your hem might not be accurate, so it's better to mark it before you serge. Find a piece, and that's gonna be about that much, so I'm gonna go ahead and mark it all along, and then I'll press it, and then I'll serge right along the bottom. Then we'll come back and attach it and hem it. So this is what it should look like after I pressed it, after I marked it and pressed it. And then pay special attention to this little corner. If you did all your measurements right and all your markings right, this should match right up to that. And then you're gonna go ahead and take those pins out and serge along the bottom of that entire hem. And another little trick that I do so that I don't have my hems bulky on the seams is that, and then this is optional, you don't have to do it, I clip my seam right where I'm gonna fold, and I flip my seam opposite where the seam is, and that way when you fold it, it's not as bulky, like right there. My seam is serged, and now I'm going to clip the corners so I can flip this around. And clip my seams. And the front flap, the way you prepare it is serge this side, then fold it, and you are going to fold it back around after you sew it, you serge it on that side, and fold the corners, and then this serge side will be left open, and this is what you're going to attach to here. Let me go ahead and prepare it, and then I'll come back and show you. So I've pressed it according to my measurements. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go ahead and flip this over and sew a seam here, just so that it's accurate, because to me it feels harder to fold it. So I'll just sew this seam right here and then flip it around. So now I press this just so that it'll be easier to attach later. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to top stitch all the way around, leaving this flap open, this serge seam open. So I'm going to go ahead and do that top stitch all the way around, and then I'll come back and attach it. Okay, I've top stitched my flap. That's what it should look like. And I made sure I pressed that back, because it's going to be easier to attach later by doing that. The next step is going to be to top stitch the collar all the way around. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and come back. I basted the collar. Let me go ahead and take these basting stitches out. So that's what you should look like. It caught that part of the collar. And now we just have to attach the flap. So the flap is going to go this way. So what you want to do is flip it around. And if you have to hand baste it, just hand baste it. You want to make sure that it comes out nice. And I'm attaching it right here, right along here. As I'm trying to figure out an easy way to attach this, what I did is I drew a line where I want my stitch to end up on the front, and then I drew a line just a smidge away from this fold here, because I don't want to catch that fold. And then I'm going to match that line as I'm sewing to this line as I'm basting it, so that way both seams will match exactly where they're supposed to be. I'm doing it with pins first just to demonstrate, and then I will baste it just to be 100% sure. And that'll end up like that. Okay, I actually machine basted it. I keep forgetting that my machine has a basting stitch, and it actually looks fabulous. That's how it's going to end. So here I am struggling to flip my my belt around. I probably should have done it the same way that I did the belt loops. So I just use this tube. I insert it in there, and then I push the end of it in, and then I finish it up with a blunt, this blunt needle. Once you get that little corner turned, it's not so hard. So I left the middle open, and I trim my seams. Once you get that top, all you have to do is flip it like this, and then push your corners out. If you don't have the equipment to do this, you can just do this part the same way you did the belt loops. So I'm gonna go ahead and now press it really nicely and finish it, do the top seam. And then for the flap, what I decided to do, because you have to tack it down here so that it stays that way, and I didn't want to mess up my pretty top stitching, you can actually do a top stitch right here and tack it right there and tack it on the bottom. But what I'm going to do is I cut out a little tiny piece of seam tape, and I'm going to put it all along the serge line, and then I'm going to press it so that it glues on and I don't have to mess with my top stitching. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we're finished. Well, I'm also going to put a non-functional button right here to tack that down, and I'm going to do a little tiny zigzag stitch, pressing the seam towards the back. Right over here, just so that it's so that it folds nicely towards the back. Here it is, the completed coat. I put in some rivets for the cuffs. I was gonna do buttons, but it's really hard to sew buttons in this little space like this. So I highly recommend that you attach these before you close it. My little pockets facing to the front. The placket looks really nice. inside, in the back. It's a lot of steps, but it's really not that hard as long as you follow the pattern markings and you follow the pattern exactly as it is.